The pole went down through 4 feet of brown water and stopped on stone squared by a chisel. Kezia Thorne felt the edge of it through the ash shaft, drew the pole up, and moved the punt a yard toward Kirk Revel. Stone again. Another yard. Stone. She had been sounding the Revel with her father since she could stand in a punt, and every sounding of his was in a book his brother now kept locked at the inn. Elias Thorne had left his brother the inn, the license, and the compensation the Revel Bridge Company paid to have the ferry stopped. He had left Kezia the ferry house on the low bank, its hard silted to the door, and 8 pounds of rates. Captain Latch, who chaired the company, had told the church wardens she'd be gone before the winter floods. She had rowed over that morning to see what remained of the house. Instead, she had found a line of worked stone under a river the whole parish said had no crossing except the captain's bridge. She marked the spot with a willow rod driven into the silt. Then she looked up. On the bridge upstream, a man in a tall hat was watching her through a glass. She knew the hat. Captain Ambrose Latch had worn it at her father's grave 3 weeks ago, standing a little apart. He lowered the glass and walked off the bridge toward the Grange side. Kezia let the punt drift and did not look at the willow rod again until he was gone. The pole was her father's. Ash, 12 feet, shod with iron and marked in feet with brass nails. One nail sat out of sequence at 2 feet 6, with a small F punched in its head. She had asked what it meant when she was 10. He had said it was for the fish and told her never to sound west of the inn hard, where the bottom was foul. She had believed both for 12 years. She pulled back to the east bank and climbed the lane to the Ferry Inn. Her uncle Reuben was behind the bar with a cloth over his shoulder and nothing to wipe. "You've been on the water," he said. "I went to see the house. And? The lower room's full of mud to the second stair. The roof's gone on the riverside. The hard's silted." She put the pole in the corner. "I want Father's river books. Reuben, they're the inn's. They're soundings." "What would the inn do with soundings?" "Captain Latch says they may bear on the company's title. He says they're best kept where a responsible person has them." Reuben's eyes went to the cupboard under the stair. "He was very civil about it. He was civil at the funeral," Kezia said. "He's civil to the dog." Her father had ferried Kirk Revel for 31 years. Then in the autumn of 1849, a drover named Ben Cass went into the river below the crossing at night and did not come out. The inquest jury, with Captain Latch as foreman, found accidental death and added that the ferry was ill-kept. After that, the word drunkard attached itself to Elias Thorne and never let go. Nobody had seen him drunk on the water. The next spring, the Bridge Company's Act passed. The ferry was extinguished by agreement, and Elias took 120 pounds and stopped rowing. The will had been read on a Tuesday. Reuben had the lease, the punt, and what was left of the compensation. Kezia had the ferry house, freehold, on the west bank. The 8 pounds owed on it, and her father's clothes. "There's the captain's paper," Reuben said now. He took an envelope from behind the spirit measures. 15 pounds for the house and the hard. And he'll see the rates cleared himself. You'd stay here. Nell would be glad of the help. Kezia opened it. The offer was signed by Latch. It asked, in its last line, that Miss Thorne deliver up any books, papers, or memoranda of the late Elias Thorne relating to the river. "He wants the books from me as well as from you," she said. "He wants everything tidy. There's no road to the house, Reuben. He knows it. Why does a bridge company want a house it can't reach?" Her uncle had no answer, and she saw he had never asked the question. She put the paper in her pocket and took the pole from the corner. "I'll be at the house," she said. "I'll want the punt for the week, and I'll pay for it. And I'll want the books, when you've thought." Reuben looked at the cupboard again. "The captain won't like it." "No," Kezia said. "I don't suppose he will." She rode across before dark with a mattress, a kettle, her father's tool bag, and the copybook he had made her fill with soundings when she was 14. The willow rod still stood in the river, a little bent by the current, 40 yards off her own hard. The ferry house stood 20 yards back from the water on a shelf of clay, with the hard in front of it and a bank of nettles behind. It was brick below and pantile above. The riverside of the roof had gone in the winter of 1855, and rain had come through the upper floor to meet the flood coming up. Kezia slept the first night on the landing in her father's coat. In the morning she counted. 3 pounds 12 shillings. A mattress, a kettle, 2 pans, a tool bag with saw, auger, mallet, caulking iron, and a tin of pitch. The pole, the copybook, a gauge board on the post at the head of the hard, painted in feet by her father and half rotted at the foot. The punt was Reuben's, on loan. She started with the hard, because a hard that would not take a boat made everything else impossible. It lay 2 feet deep in 6 years of silt, and she cut it back, with a spade, each morning, while the water was down. By the 3rd day, the old cobbles showed at the top, and she found the post that carried the gauge board was set in a stone socket, dressed like the stones under the river. The board itself she scraped clean with a knife. Her father's numbers came up first, black on white, 1 to 8. Under the paint, at the mark for 2 feet 6, someone long before him had cut a groove into the wood and a letter beside it. The letter was F. She stood with the knife in her hand and looked at the brass nail on the pole, and then at the groove, and then across at the willow rod still standing 40 yards out. 2 feet 6 was a depth. It was not for the fish. That afternoon a man came down the bank path from the north with a chain and a staff and a bowler hat, and stopped where the nettles ended. He was thin and careful. Miss Thorne? Nathan Coker, clerk to the Ravel Bridge Company. I survey for them as well. He looked at the roof and made a note in a book. The captain wished me to say the company would rather this house were not lived in. He considers it unsafe. He's welcome to consider, Kezia said. It's mine. Understood. Only, the bank path is Grangeland, and the captain would prefer you didn't use it, and the company will need to look at your rates. Coker closed the book. He glanced at the willow rod. You're sounding, I think. Your father did a great deal of that. There's nothing to sound for. Then it does no harm. He touched his hat and went back the way he had come. She watched him stop on the rise, take a bearing on the rod with his staff, and write it down. The nearest neighbors were at West Ravel, 5 cottages a quarter-mile down the bank, cut off from the church and the shop, since the company stopped the lane and took the road round to the bridge. From there it was 2 miles to Kirk Ravel by the bridge road and a penny each way at the gate. Anne Sowerby was the oldest of them, 78, a carrier's widow with a grandson, Davy, who was 12, and did the walking. She came up the bank on the 4th day with a jug of milk she said had turned. It had not. You're Elias's girl, she said. You've his shoulders. I've his pole, so I see. Anne looked at the rod in the river a long time. You'll get no thanks over there for stirring the water. They've had 6 years to settle to the bridge. Mrs. Hebden at the inn says a girl in a wet house is a scandal, and the captain's right to want it down. Anne handed her the jug. I walked across this river once. Dryshod, near enough. I was 9. Nobody remembers it but me, and I'm not sure I'm remembering it right. Kezia turned with the jug in both hands. Where? But the old woman only nodded at the far bank under the churchyard wall, where ivy and thorn had grown down to the water, and would say no more that day. That evening, with the water low, Kezia pulled out to the willow rod and worked east from it, a yard at a time, the pole going down and stopping on stone, and again on stone. 91 strokes. At the 92nd, the iron shoe struck something with an edge, like a stair. And above it, under the ivy, She saw the top of a worn stone step going up into the churchyard bank. She sat in the punt and let it swing on the pole. The ferry landing was 80 yards upstream, at the inn. Nobody had ever landed here, yet somebody had cut steps. She made the upper room habitable first. There were 40 pantiles left on the land side and none on the water side. She bought a tarred sheet at the shop in Kirk Revel for 4 shillings, carried it past Mrs. Hebden at the inn door, and stretched it over the bare rafters with battens and her father's nails. It sagged. It kept out the rain. She set the mattress against the chimney breast and wrote in the back of the copybook, "Hard cleared to the 4th cobble, roof sheeted. 3L8 Sachin left." Then she went to look at the steps. By daylight they were nothing much. Ivy had made a mat over them, and the churchyard wall had been built across the top so long ago the mortar had grown lichen. Under the ivy the treads were worn hollow in the middle. Kezia counted 11, going down into the water. She was pulling Thorne away from the lowest dry one, when a voice above her said, "You'll have the wall down." Amos Wrigglesworth was the parish clerk. He was small and dry, and had taught her letters for 2 winters. He stood in the churchyard, with a hoe. "What were these for?" she said. "The Kirk stairs. Coffin stairs, they say. Bodies came up from the water to be buried. They came by the ferry. The ferry landing's at the inn. So it is." He considered the steps. "They're older than the ferry, then. Older than the church tower, some say. There was a Kirk Revel before there was a Thorne to row anybody to it. The captain's a churchwarden, Kezia. He asked at vestry last week whether the parish had any objection to a wall being built along here to keep the bank from slipping. Nobody objected. A wall over the steps. A wall along the bank." He went back to his hoeing. "I only mention it." She wrote that down too. The river rose on the 2nd Thursday in April, after rain on the wolds she had not seen. It came up 2 feet between noon and dusk, brown and fast. She read the gauge board every hour and knew from the rate it would be over the hard by midnight and in the lower room by 2. She moved the tools upstairs and hauled the punt up the bank on rollers. At 10, Davy Sowerby came running along the flooded path with his boots in his hand. "Martha Pinder's little one can't breathe. It's the croup. Gran says the doctor, and there's no getting to the bridge. The road's under at the bottom." The doctor lived in Kirk Revel, across the water. Kezia looked at the river. It was moving faster than a man could walk, carrying branches, and there was no light on it. 4 feet 9 and rising, but slower now. "Get in," she said. She did not take the straight line. She took the punt 50 yards up the bank in the slack under the willows, hauling on roots. She pushed off where the current would set her down onto the inn hard, and let the river do the work, while she kept the head up with the pole. Davy sat in the bottom and did not speak. Twice the pole found no bottom. Once a branch came out of the dark and she fended it off. They came in against the inn, hard enough to crack a plank, and a man who had been standing there with a lantern caught the painter and held it. "You're mad," he said. "I need the doctor for West Revel." Croup. He looked at her a moment longer, and then he ran. His name was Tom Gathercole. He was the carrier between Kirk Revel and Driffield, and his horses were stabled at the inn. He came back with Dr. Ainsley, who was 60 and did not want to get into a punt, and got in anyway with his bag between his knees. Tom got in after him without being asked and took the second pole. Going back was worse, because the current was against the crossing and the landing had to be found in the dark. Kezia read it by the sound of the water on the willows and the feel of the pole, and ground it on the flooded hard within a yard of where she meant to. The child lived. Dr. Ainsley sat in Anne Sowerby's kitchen till dawn. When he left, he said Elias Thorne would have done it exactly so, and that he had told the inquest jury as much in 49, for all the good it did. Tom stayed to help her drag the punt clear. In the gray light, he looked at the cracked plank, and at the pole with its brass nails, and then at the willow rod, which had held. Reuben says you're sounding for something, he said. I'm sounding because I was taught to. I. He turned the pole in his hands and stopped at the nail-marked F. What's this one? I don't know yet, Kezia said. But it's on the board as well. By the middle of May, the river had fallen to 3 feet at the board, and she could see the willow rod's shadow on the stones beneath it. She cut a dozen more rods and set them along the line, 10 yards apart, sounding each place 3 times before she drove one. From the hard, the rods made a slight curve, bellied downstream, and ended at the ivy under the churchyard wall. She measured the run with her father's chain, borrowed back from Reuben's cellar without asking, and made it 92 yards. Wrigglesworth, leaning on the churchyard wall, said it would be the old mill dam. There was a fulling mill here before the church was built. The dam ran across to the west bank. Your stones are the footing of it. That was reasonable. It kept her awake anyway. A dam ran square across a river, and this line ran on a slant, and dam stones did not lie flat with their dressed faces upward. She wrote both things down and did not argue. She had begun copying her soundings into the back of the copybook every evening, as her father had made her do. It was because of that habit that she found what she should have found in March. Turning to the front for a clean page, she stopped at an entry in her own hand, dated August 1847, when she had been 14 and copying his book at the kitchen table for practice. It ran, C. From the socket to the kirk stairs. 92 YDs. Mean 2 feet 4. Flags 3 by 2. Stobs at 10 U. Passable under the F. She read it 3 times. She had written those words herself and never asked what they meant. Her father had let her copy that page and never once let her sound where it pointed. He had known the line to the yard 10 years ago. In the morning she went down the bank to Anne Sowerby with the book open. The old woman read the entry with her lips moving. Stobs, she said. White stakes. They stood along it every 10 yards, tall as a man, so you could see the line when the water was over the stones. My husband drove the cart across on that line to save the ferry penny, many a time. Under the F, mind. Above the F, you took the boat, or you stayed home. She handed the book back. It's the Causey, girl. That's your C. Ravel Causey. It was the road before there was a ferry, and the ferry was for when the road was under. Then why does nobody say so? Because it's been 6 years, and the Stobs came out, and the captain's a magistrate, and folk are tired. Anne looked at the river, and because of Ben Cass, after he drowned, nobody wanted to be the one who said there was a way over there in the dark. He went in below the crossing. Father said so at the inquest. He did. And the jury said the ferry was ill-kept, and that was that. Anne was quiet a moment. Ned Ratcliffe worked the gravel keel for the bridge the summer before. He'd know what they did at the church end. He drinks at your uncle's when he's got the money for it. Which isn't often. Kezia went back along the bank with the book against her chest. The overseer's notice came at the end of the week, carried by Davy because the postman would not walk the bank. £8 2 shillings. Rates on the ferry house, 7 years arrears, to be paid by Michaelmas or the goods distrained. She had £2 1 shilling. She sat on the hard and did sums that came out the same way each time. Tom Gathercole came down the bank the next morning with a handcart of pantiles. He had 80 of them off a barn pulled down at Driffield. 6 shillings. And would take it in eels, which she had been catching in her father's traps, and selling through him at market. He climbed on the roof without asking, and she handed the tiles up. By dark, half the water side was covered, and the tarred sheet was folded on the landing. There's a man called Ratcliffe, she said, holding the ladder. He worked the gravel keel. He did. He's at Hull now, on the ballast lighters. Comes home when he's paid off. Tom came down and wiped his hands. You want to be careful who you ask, Kezia. Coker was in the inn last night writing in his book. He'd counted your rods from the bridge. 12, he said. He asked Reuben whether you'd taken money for carrying folk across, and Reuben said you had a penny off Anne Sowerby. Anne forced it on me. He wrote it down. She looked at the 12 rods standing in the evening water and understood that the line was visible now to anyone who cared to look, and that the captain cared. The lower room took her 3 weeks. She barrowed the mud out and down the hard at low water, 20 barrows a morning, until her hands split, and washed the floor with river water and a besom. Under the mud the floor was brick, laid herringbone, and under the stair the bricks stopped at a line of oak boards set on edge, gray and swollen, that she had taken for a partition. They were a door laid sideways, and behind them was a recess the width of the stair and 5 feet deep, dry because the stair rose over it. She lit the candle and looked in. Stakes first, 6 of them against the back wall, each 8 feet long, shod with iron and painted white to within a yard of the top, though the paint had gone yellow and one had rotted at the shoe. Stobs. Above them, on 2 nails, hung a board of elm, 3 feet by 1, and she had to bring the candle close to read what had been painted on it in black. Ravelcausey. Passable on foot and for carts, under the F, no toll to be taken. Repaired at the charge of the township. Jonas Thorne, keeper. 1819. Jonas Thorne was her grandfather. She had known he kept the ferry before her father. She had not known there was such a thing as a keeper of a causey, or that her family had been it. On the floor under the board was a japanned tin box, the kind a carrier keeps waybills in. The lid had rusted shut, and she opened it with the caulking iron. Inside, folded small, were papers. She carried them up to the light one at a time. The first 4 were receipts, in different hands, all to Jonas Thorne. Received of the surveyor of highways for the township of Kirk Ravel, £1 4 shillings, for staking the causey and clearing the flags, 1,819. The same in 1824, 1831 and 1,836. The last one to Elias Thorne, at £1 10. She read them twice. The parish had paid her family 4 times in 20 years to keep the crossing marked and clear. The parish did not pay to keep a private ferry. It paid for its roads. The 5th paper was on better stock and folded differently. It was a copy, in a clerk's hand, of an agreement made the 4th day of May, 1850, between the Ravel Bridge Company and Elias Thorne of the Ferry House. She read the sum first. £120 in full compensation for the extinguishment of the ferry and the loss of the said Elias Thorne's livelihood. Then she read the rest, slower. And the said Elias Thorne for himself and his heirs doth covenant that he will not hold out, use, mark, stake, or assist any person to use any other passage across the said river, nor make any claim in respect thereof. She sat on the bottom stair with the paper on her knee for a long time. Her father had taken the money and had promised not to mark the causey. He had pulled the stobs and put them behind the stair with the board that said no toll to be taken. And then he had gone on sounding the line every summer for the rest of his life. He had made his daughter copy the figures without telling her what they were, and had told her never to sound west of the inn hard. He had kept the record and kept his word, both, and neither had done him any good. What she did not understand was why. Why the company had wanted the covenant. Why they had needed a ferryman to promise not to use a road that belonged to the parish. And why the agreement said passage, when everyone who knew the thing called it the causey, as if whoever drew it up had not wished to write its name. Coker came the next afternoon. He stood at the edge of the hard and did not come onto it. He looked at the open door and the barrow of mud, and could not have seen the recess from where he stood. "The captain has asked me to renew his offer," he said. £30. "It's more than the house will fetch from anyone else, and you'll allow it's more than the rates." "It's more than the rates. He would also have you know the company's solicitor considers carrying persons for reward to be keeping a ferry, which the act extinguished." £5 each offense. Nobody wishes to bring that. He paused. The bank wall will be begun in August, above and below the kirk stairs, a matter of the churchyard. Nothing to do with the company. Nothing to do with the company, Kezia said. Just so. He touched his hat. The offer stands till Michaelmas. When he had gone, she went down to the recess again and counted the stobs. 6. Her copybook said they had stood every 10 yards. 92 yards. There should have been 10. Ned Ratcliffe came home to Kirk Revel in the 3rd week of July with his wages and drank most of them at the Ferry Inn in 2 days. Kezia found him on the 3rd morning, sitting on the inn hard with his boots in the water, a big man gone soft, near 60, who would not look at her when she said her name. I know whose you are, he said. You worked the gravel keel for the bridge. In 49, I worked a keel. There were 4 of us. She sat down a yard from him and put the copybook on her knee, open at the page in her 14-year-old hand. He looked at it because there was nowhere else to look. That's your father's line, he said after a while. It's the causey. Aye. He wiped his mouth. We took flags off the church end of it. July it was, before the piers were founded. Coker wanted stone for the cofferdam footing, and there it was, dressed and handy, and the captain said the road was stopped by the act, so it was the company's to lift. We took up a dozen, maybe 14. There was a hole after 5 feet at the low water, right where the line comes in under the stairs. He was quiet. Your father came out and sounded it the same week. He went up to the Grange about it. I saw him go, and then Ben Cass. November. Dark. And drink in him. And he'd walk the causey 100 times. He went in at the hole. Ned put his hands over his face and took them away. I stood at the inquest and I said nothing, and Coker stood beside me. I've a place on the lighters at Hull because Coker's cousin gives out the places. You understand me? Yes. Then don't put my name in anybody's mouth. I'll say it to you. I'll not say it to a bench. She could have argued. She could have said that a man who had helped dig the hole a drover, drowned in, owed something to somebody. She looked at his boots in the water and did not. I won't name you, she said. Not unless you tell me I may. He nodded and did not thank her. And she went up to the inn. Reuben was in the back kitchen with Nell and a letter. It was from the magistrate's clerk at Beverley. An objection had been lodged to the renewal of the Ferry Inn's license at the Brewster Sessions in August, on the ground that the house was ill-conducted. Reuben's hands were shaking. He's a magistrate, Reuben said. He can't sit on his own objection. But he'll have dined with the ones who do. It's not his objection. It'll be in Coker's name. What difference does that make? He put the letter down. He came here himself, Kezia. Last night. He said if you took the £30 and the house was quiet, he saw no reason the objection need go forward. He said your father's books were the company's concern and he'd take them off my hands and that would be an end of it. He was very reasonable, Nell said. Reuben. And he did not look at her. You'd have me sign, Kezia said. I'd have you take £30 for a house with no road to it, that the river'll have in 10 years, and let me keep the roof I've got. He was not shouting. That was worse. I've the lease. And nothing else. Your father left you a ruin and left me a debt. And now the captain's made your ruin my debt as well. She thought of the board behind the stair. No toll to be taken. She thought of the receipts, the parish paying a Thorne to keep the road open for people who could not spare a penny twice a day. She thought of Anne Sowerby at 9, walking across dryshod. I can't sign it, she said. It isn't only mine to sign. Reuben stood up. He went out through the bar. She heard the cupboard under the stair open. He came back with 2 books bound in oiled cloth, her father's hand on the spines, 1,826 and 1,834, and put them on the table. Then I'll do what I can for myself, he said. She reached for them. He put his hand flat on the pile. Coker's coming at noon. Kezia stood with her own copybook under her arm. She was going to lose the books. The man losing them had been kind to her when she was small, and was frightened now, and had a right to be. She had £1.11 and a promise to Ned Ratcliffe, and a line of willow rods. "There's a third," she said. 41 to 56. He was still writing at Christmas. Reuben looked at the pile and then at her, and something moved in his face that she could not read. "That's all there is," he said, and turned to the window to wait for Coker. The masons began the churchyard wall on the 4th of August. 2 men and a boy, with stone brought over the bridge in Latch's cart, working from the north end down toward the kirk stairs at a pace that would have them there in a fortnight. Kezia watched them each morning and went back to sounding. The water reached 2 feet 6 on the 11th. That evening, she walked the causey. She went in from her own hard with the pole, and her skirts kilted. The water came to her knees, then to her thighs where the flags dipped in the middle, then to her knees again. At the last 20 yards the bottom fell away and she stopped, and sounded, and found 5 feet where the pole should have found stone. The hole. She sounded round it and made it 14 feet across. Beyond it the flags began again for 6 yards and ran up under the ivy to the stairs. She wrote the figures on her wrist with a stub of pencil because she had left the book on the hard. Reuben's license was renewed at Beverly on the 18th. The objection was withdrawn on the morning of the sessions. He sent Davy across with a message. He wanted the punt back at the inn by the end of the month, as it was the inn's, and he was sorry. She had a fortnight of the punt. She used it. Tom brought her a chain and hooks off a dredging keel, and she began lifting silt from the flags nearest her hard, a bucket at a time, so the line would show white at low water. Davy worked the far end of the chain. Anne let him, because it was better than the road. On the last night of August, she woke a little after 1 to the sound of a keel's sweeps in the reach. She knew the sound. She went to the window. There was a hooded lantern out on the river, and the black shape of a keel lying broadside across her line of rods, with men in it. Iron rang on stone. Something heavy went into the water, and the light swung. She was in the punt before she had thought about it, poling hard in the dark, and she was halfway across before she saw a second figure in the water at the keel's bow. Davy. He had heard the sweeps, too, and had waded in on the causey. "Get off there," a man's voice said from the keel. Not Coker's. "Get off the stones, boy." Davy shouted something back about the rods. Someone in the keel swung a crowbar under a flag and levered, and the flag came up on its edge, and the man let it go. It went over on the downstream side, and Davy, who had been holding a rod, went in after it. He did not come up. Kezia went over the side with the painter round her wrist. The water was black and moving, and she found him by touch, 4 feet down against the flag that had pinned his arm to the bed. She got her feet on stone and heaved. The flag shifted. He came free, and his face broke the surface, making a sound she did not want to remember. By the time she had him over the punt's gunwale, the keel had put out its light and was gone upstream on the sweeps. His right arm was broken above the wrist. Anne said it herself, because the doctor was 2 miles and a penny away, and it was 2 in the morning. Kezia held the lantern and the boy's other hand. He did not cry. He said, "When it was done, they had 8 flags up before you came. I counted." She went back to the ferry house at first light and found the door open, and the recess under the stair emptied. The stobs lay broken on the floor. The elm board was gone. The tin box was gone. The papers were not in it. She had sewn them into the lining of her father's coat a week after she found them, and the coat had been on her back all night. The board with her grandfather's name was gone, and 6 white stakes that had stood in the river when Anne Sowerby was 9 were kindling. The summons came on the 3rd of September, served by the parish constable. Kezia Thorne, of the Ferry house, was charged on the information of Nathan Coker, clerk to the Ravel Bridge Company. She had obstructed the river Revel by fixing stakes and rods in the bed of it, and had taken reward for carrying persons across, contrary to the act, to be heard before the justices at Kirk Revel schoolroom, the 9th day of October. She read it on the hard, the punt behind her, that went back to the inn tomorrow. 8 of her 12 rods were gone. The flags they had marked lay somewhere in 5 feet of water, where nobody but she and a boy with a broken arm knew they had been. She had a month, no punt, and a broken case. She spent the first week of it on paper. Wrigglesworth let her at the parish chest in the vestry, because he was frightened of the captain, and more frightened of having helped build a wall over a thing he could not name. She read the highway rate books by the window with her finger under the lines. 4 times the surveyor of highways had charged the township for staking and cleansing the Revel causey. Twice a parish jury had presented it as a public highway out of repair. In 1831, the entry read, the causey being the ancient horse and foot road, the ferry serving only in time of flood. The ferry served the road, not the road the ferry. It was the other way round from everything the parish had believed for 6 years. That was in the parish's own hand, and no covenant of her father's could touch it, because he had never owned the road. The parish did. A man cannot sell what is not his, nor promise away a public right by taking £120 for his own private one. The rest was in the river. 92 yards of dressed flags, and the 14-foot hole the company had cut in a public highway to found its dam and never made good. That was worth more to her than any treasure, because a jury could be stood on it and made to look. The last piece she found on the 18th, and it was Coker who gave it to her, though he did not mean to. He came to say the offer was withdrawn. The captain can hardly buy a house from a woman he is prosecuting. After the sessions, if you're sensible, we may speak again. He looked at the mended roof and the swept lower room, and something in him wanted her to know he saw the work of it. Your father signed, Miss Thorne. Whatever you found, he signed it and took the money. He gave his own word, she said. Not the parish's. Did the company buy the road from the parish, Mr. Coker? Is there a paper for that? He did not answer. She saw in the way he did not answer that there was no such paper. He had looked for one years ago and had not found it, and had built everything on a ferryman's signature, because it was the only signature the company could get. There was a highway, she said. A company can't buy a public road. It can only get it stopped up by the justices, at sessions, with notice. And you never did, because to ask for that you'd have had to admit in open court there was a road to stop. So you paid my father to be silent, and called it a ferry, and cut a hole in the King's highway, and let a man drown in it. Coker's face had gone still. You can prove none of it. I can prove the flags. I can prove the receipts. I can prove the parish presented it a highway. And I have my father's soundings from the year the hole was dug. You have 2 books. I have the 3rd. He said it, and then wished he had not. So Reuben had given it to them after all, the book with the hole in it. She went to the inn that night, and did not accuse him. She told him what she had found in the vestry, and what Coker had let fall, and watched him understand it. The company had made him hand over the one paper that named the day they cut the causey. They would burn it, and his brother's last winters of sounding would be gone with it. Reuben sat a long while. Then he got up and went to the chimney in the back kitchen. He took out a loose brick above the salt box and brought down a small book bound in oiled cloth, 1841 on the spine in Elias's hand. I gave Coker the fair copy, he said. Your father kept 2. This is the rough one, the one he sounded from. I never told the captain it was there. I never rightly believed it mattered. His hands were not steady. There's an entry for the last week of July, 49. He wrote it the day he came back from the Grange. She opened it in the kitchen. The entry was in her father's worst hand, written angry. Flags lifted at church end by the company keel. A hole 5 feet where the causey was 2 feet 4. told Latch to his face. He says the road is stopped by his act. It is not in the act. I have looked. Ben Cass and 40 others walk it after dark. God forgive me if I hold my tongue for the money. And one goes in. Under it, dated the 9th of November, 4 words. Ben Cass. He went. Kezia closed the book. Her father had known and written it down the day it happened and signed the covenant the next spring because his wife was dying and the doctor cost a sovereign a visit. He had spent the rest of his life sounding a road he had promised not to mark, so the figures would exist on the day someone was brave enough to use them. "Will you stand up at the sessions," she said, "and say you kept this book?" Reuben looked at the fire. Nell put her hand on his shoulder. "Aye," he said. "I'll stand up." The justices sat in the schoolroom on the 9th of October, at a table on the low platform where Wrigglesworth taught the infants. 3 of them. Old Mr. Fewster in the chair, who was deaf. Dr. Ainsley, newly on the roll that quarter. And Captain Latch, who could not sit on his own company's information and sat instead among the public, hat on his knee, Coker beside him. The room was full. West Ravel had walked the 2 miles and the penny. Tom Gathercole stood at the back with his arms folded. Anne Sowerby had a chair because Ainsley sent for one. Coker opened it himself, brief and exact. He produced the constable, who had counted 12 rods in the river. The defendant had put stakes in a navigable river and taken a penny from Mrs. Sowerby for carriage across it, contrary to the act that extinguished the ferry. The company sought only the small penalty and the removal of the obstruction. "Have you the act?" Kezia asked. She was allowed to ask. Ainsley saw to that. Coker had the act. She asked him to read the schedule of what it extinguished. He read it. It extinguished the ferry across the river Ravel at Kirk Ravel, together with the tolls and the ferry rights. "Does it name a causeway?" she said. "A footway? A road?" "It does not. There was none to name." "Read the parish rate book," she said. Wrigglesworth carried it up and read the entry of 1,831. The causey being the ancient horse and foot road, the ferry serving only in time of flood. Then the 4 surveyors' payments to Jonas and Elias Thorne for staking and cleansing it, and the 2 presentments of the causey as a public highway out of repair. The room had gone quiet the way a court does when it stops watching a case and starts watching a fight. "The act your company got," Kezia said to Coker, "extinguished a ferry. It said nothing of the road. Because your company never asked the justices to stop up the road, and you could not, without saying in open court that a road was there. So you paid my father, who owned the ferry, to hold his tongue about the causeway, which he did not own. The parish owns it. He could no more sell it than I could sell this schoolroom." Coker said the covenant bound the Thornes and their heirs. She agreed that it bound her. As to the ferry, she said it could not bind the parish, which was not a party to it, and had never been paid a farthing, and whose road it was. Then she called the whole. She had Anne Sowerby tell the court, in her cracked voice, of crossing the causey dry-shod as a child, and of her husband driving the cart over it under the F, 30 years running. She had Dr. Ainsley repeat what he had told the jury in 49. That Elias Thorne was sober and careful on the water, and that Ben Cass had drowned 40 yards below the ferry track on the line of the causeway. Then she read her father's rough entry of July 49. The flags lifted, the hole 5 feet where the causey was 2 feet 4, told Latch to his face, "It is not in the act." And under it, the 9th of November. Ben Cass. He went. "The company cut that hole," she said, "in a public highway, to found its dam, and never made it good. A man walked into it in the dark and drowned, and the company's clerk stood at the inquest and let the jury blame the ferry." She kept her voice low. She had learned from Anne that the quiet ones were heard. "I put 12 rods in the river to mark where the road lies under the water. Your men pulled up 8 of them at 1 in the morning and broke a boy's arm doing it. That is your obstruction. Mine only shows the road. Latch was on his feet. From the floor, he said the woman was distressed and had no proof. The flags were a road and not a dam, and that the whole tale rested on a dead man's scribble and an old woman's memory. Fewster, who was deaf, had heard almost none of it. But Ainsley leaned to him and spoke in his ear, and Fewster nodded and said the thing that broke it. Then let us see the road, he said. Adjourn to the water. If there are flags, we shall walk on them. If there are none, the young woman is fined and done with. The water was at its lowest a little after 3. The justices and most of the parish went down the church lane to the kirk stairs, where the new masonry stopped 6 feet short of the ivy, unfinished. Kezia went into the water first, in her father's boots, with the pole. She walked out from the bottom step onto stone. The water came to her knees. She went on, 92 yards of it, calling the depths back to Wrigglesworth, who wrote them down. 24, 24, 25. At the hole, she put the pole down, and it went to 5 feet, and she held it up, dripping to the mark. Here is where they dug, she said. A man could stand on the road either side and drown between. Dr. Ainsley took off his boots and stockings and rolled his trousers and came out to her along the flags, an old man testing each stone with his foot. He stood beside her in the middle of the river, on a road the parish had forgotten it owned. He turned to the bank, where Latch stood dry on the grass. It's a road, Ambrose, he called. I'm standing on it. The justices dismissed the information. They could hardly do otherwise, with 2 of their number standing wet on the flags. Fewster, when it was written up, added that the causeway was for the surveyor and the parish. The bench would take a serious view of the whole if it were not made good before winter. The parish took a serious view of it too, once it saw that the road was its own, and always had been. At the vestry in November, it resolved that the Revel causey was a public highway, that the surveyor should reset the stobs, and that the company should fill the hole it had dug as a nuisance in the highway. Latch's solicitor wrote a great deal. In the end, the company filled the hole. The alternative was an indictment at the assizes for the death of Ben Cass, and the captain's own counsel told him plainly that no jury in the riding would help him now. They filled it with stone in December. Kezia stood on her hard and watched the company's keel drop the last of the load, and thought her father had waited 7 years to see that keel do that, and had not. The causeway could not be a road for carts again without work the parish could not afford in a year. But it could be marked and walked, and it was. Wrigglesworth reset the stobs at the 10-yard marks. 6 new ones cut by Tom and Davy from the captain's broken wall, and painted white to the F. And Kezia sounded the line and set them true. Under the F, a man could cross dry to his knees. Above it, the ferry. There was no ferry now, and the parish had a right to want one in flood. And so, at the March vestry, it did a thing the company could not stop. It appointed a keeper of the causey and flood ferry at the old surveyor's wage, £1.10 a year, with the loan of a parish punt, and named Kezia Thorne to the place her grandfather had held. £1.10 was not a living, but the eels were, and the carrying was, once she could take a lawful penny in flood. The smallholders of West Revel had a way to church and market that did not cost them a bridge toll twice a day. Tom Gathercole put the ferry punt on the water in April and mended the ferry house chimney in May. By the time the flags were clear and white, he was down the bank more days than not. One evening in June, hauling the chain with her, he said they might as well keep one house between them as pay for 2. She said the ferry house had no road to it. He said he'd noticed, and had come by water all the same. She married him at Kirk Revel in September. The churchyard wall was finished by then, low along the bank, with a gap left open at the kirk stairs. Davy's arm healed, crooked but strong. He worked the far chain still and learned the pole. Kezia taught him the soundings out of her father's book and made him copy them at the kitchen table as she had. This time she told him what every figure was for. Reuben kept the inn. The captain never drank there again, which suited them both. Coker left the company's service that winter and took a place surveying for the county. And once, meeting Kezia on the bridge, he stopped as if to speak, and did not, and touched his hat, and went on. She thought he had wanted to say he had known, and had built the case anyway, and could not now unmake the man who had. She let him keep it. The company gave the elm board back that winter, cracked across where an axe had started it. She hung it again inside the lower room. Under her grandfather's line she set her own name and the year in her own hand, and left room beneath it, because a keeper's board wanted room. On the last low water before the winter floods, she went out along the causey to trew the stobs. The pole went down and rang on stone, dressed stone squared by a chisel, a yard at a time, toward Kirk Revel. At the middle stob she stopped and looked back. Smoke came out of the mended chimney. Davy was on the chain, and the white stakes stood in the water where anyone crossing after dark could see the road and keep to it. Then she drove the stob home and sounded on.